And you're live.
This is the conference committee for the FY 2022 budget, and we are meeting here at 9 to go and see how many of the differences we have between the House and Senate budget that we can resolve or agree upon today. Also throw out some other ideas for discussion, and also wanted to talk a little bit about the money that we had put in relative to what we need to do for the reopening of the session. And I think Representative Hooper had some questions about that as well. So I'm going to, do you want to start with, you said you had some of the smaller areas of kind of cleanup that you'd like to propose getting off the list?
We continue our sweeping and our washing to get things all aligned and in order. So like to suggest that we will accept B501, which deals with education services. We had proposed paying for the community high school out of the ESSER fund for 2 years. You have dropped that to 1 year. I think as we further understand use of funds, we may have to have another conversation about that. But at this time, we accept your dropping that to one year. So that's B501.
So I just want to be clear, because we're talking about what we do for the 1 year. And we recognize that the ESSER funding is a source of disagreement or concern from the Agency of Education. So we may, right now, we're just agreeing to a 1 year, whatever it is, to be the funding source, probably still to be revisited.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
The history of that, just to remind all of us, is the governor had proposed paying for it out of the education fund. We switched it to the ESSER funds. We switched it for a couple of years to, just to show that ongoing ability to pay for it. And now you're proposing to reduce it by a year to 1 year. And we just have this continual conversation about how do we appropriately pay for education services that are provided to people who are in our correctional facilities. But and that's where we are.
And we know that using the Ed Fund is a source of strong opposition, at least from some members of your body. The Senate has felt that this educational right should be treated the same as any other student, but we have decided that we would not carry on that battle, although our position is unchanged. So thank you for that, and we'll come back and revisit the source.
Okay, thank you. The next place that we're going to is E100.6. This is the continual conversation about the deployment of body cameras. And you have struck language that we had requiring that there be policies in place for the use of those at the Departments of Fish and Wildlife and Liquor and Lottery. We will concede to your striking that language. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about body cameras and how they are used and if they are used appropriately, particularly for these entities that are not kind of in who are not routinely trained on those sort of police procedures. This is just Mary just having a bad feeling about this over the years, which is part of the reason we had that in there. But our policy committees have conceded to your striking this, and so we accept your strike.
Well, thank you. Our thinking on it was, the more we thought about it, liquor and lottery, we weren't, it did not seem to be an area where cameras were, we even questioned whether they were appropriate or needed there.
Yeah.
And so, and then we didn't fund the additional ones for fish and wildlife. So we just felt, in light of not wanting to fund anything more, the language kind of was hanging there.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So good for that. The next one, again, another small one, is E105, which is a change in the reporting date. I think your language accomplishes essentially the same thing that our does. It just yours just aligns it a little bit more closely to the budget process, and which is great.
Yeah, well, there was internal, the way it was written, there was kind of inconsistency between annual and biennial. And so that's what we were attempting to address.
Yeah. So
Okay. All right.
accomplished.
Yeah. All right.
And we do not agree with you on E127, which is, we added that during the pandemic, during the emergency times, that the Joint Fiscal Committee would invite chairs, policy committee chairs, for relevant discussions when the Joint Fiscal Committee is meeting. Given the amount of money that has the potential for flowing through JFC, and particularly when we are not meeting and people and other members of the body may not be as attuned to what we're doing, our policy committee chairs felt really strongly about wanting to know those sorts of decisions which clearly affect policy that they have jurisdiction over. I know that the JFC can invite people to their meetings, but this was a marker for us of saying it's important to be engaging our policy committee folks. So we are not agreeing with your proposed change there.
We probably are going to have to do some rewrite anyway, but okay. So your language would you restate what your language? I can go back and look, but
so it's what, E127, and it just says, so you struck the section, and it says that if we're in the event that we're meeting around allocating funds that affecting public health, safety, and welfare, that we shall notify and invite participation of the chairs of committee of jurisdiction relative to the specific proposal. Just trying to get them in the room while we're having a conversation about allocation of funds, so that we can take advantage of their expertise.
All right, so we'll take a look at that.
Okay. And then the last one is E300.1, which is simply a date change. Can you tell us why it was important to change that date? We're fine. I was just curious about why we were changing it.
I need to go back.
I think that was for Senate's deadline on introducing legislation.
Yeah, let me take a look. Probably you're right.
Yeah, it moves it from August to December of this year. It has to, it's the submitting a healthcare workforce strategic plan report. So you're giving them 3 more months is what it does.
That I think was the request that we got, Stephanie. I believe that is the request we received from Ina Backus. Is that, or is that a different report? Is Stephanie on?
No, she isn't on. She had a doctor's appointment, but We
I'll
can-
have to double check. We had so many requests, but
Yeah.
we did have a request from Ina Backus, who's healthcare reform director, to give more time. So I think, let me double check. Maybe I'm connecting it with a different request, but
Yeah,
we did an extension. I know that specifically because they, and I can get her email on that if that's what it's connecting to, which I think it is, and then we can go back. But I think it was simply because of the additional work in the pandemic. They were asking for more time, but
Yeah.
I need to confirm that. And so that was E
300.1.
E300.1. Okay,
then-
let me,
Yeah,
okay. All right, I'll see what I can connect.
yeah. As I said, it seems totally benign. I'm not concerned about it. Please don't go to a great deal of effort. I was just interested in why it was proposed to be changed. And then
Yeah.
you met, so that's the end of what we have for you. We were curious, and you mentioned that maybe you could discuss it. There is in C108, there is a proposal for spending 2.5 million in CRF money to bring us back. And we've been reading and following the work of the Joint Legislative Management Committee to resolve that. And obviously we're going to have some expenditures to be able to safely move back into the State House. I am as interested in the personnel side of things and wondering about that conversation. And Senator Kitchell, I know you sit on that committee, and I thought maybe you could offer some insight.
Yeah, we did have actually been spending quite a bit of time around the what it will take to reopen and for next session, and what space needs are and what technology needs are. So the 2.5 was really a recommendation from Catherine Benham, who had been working on this from the Joint Fiscal Office, and looking at what the Freeman, French and Freeman report, which we had done by that management committee to help us consider options, space options, et cetera. And so we recognized that, and we took testimony from Kevin around some of the technology needs. Even when we're back, if we're limiting space, you still have to have sort of that the remote ability and what it takes for cameras, what it'll take for IT upgrades. So this was just a way of recognizing the need for us to have money set aside to help fund those recommendations to make our space workable, and people will feel comfortable coming back to the State House in January or even earlier if joint committees are going to be meeting over the summer. So different rooms have been identified as larger size rooms for activities. Then of course there was the boiler replacement. So the 2.5 was simply a suggested allocation using the sort of the Freeman, French and Freeman work as the basis for recommending it. It doesn't touch the staffing, and I know that comments have been made about the fact that we would need additional staff, and I think Steve Klein has made reference to several positions, including we just hired a human resource director, and there's tremendous amount of work that's got to be done just to get our house in order relative to job descriptions and all the things that should be in place, and compensation. But there are also a number of her human resource issues associated with moving and concerns, and that have to be addressed. So I know that there was some discussion around adding a position to work with Arlene in this for a period of time to get some of this work caught up and to address the issues and any questions that come up as a result of our reopening from staff. And then I believe that there was another position, Steve, that had been identified, but you're going to have to refresh our memories on that.
Yeah, you're correct. There were actually proposals to add 2 limited service positions for the legislature. One is for Arlene, deal with the staffing movement, and there's going to be a lot of disruption in the staff along with the normal responsibilities she would have. And the other is something that the House Institutions Committee has been working on with leadership, and it has to do with like a clerk of the works. We have, this is a very, I think, a very uncertain process. And there was a study that we're probably going to hear today or tomorrow that there was a review of the House committee rooms, and there are issues with air quality. And so what's going to happen is BGS is when they're responsible for carrying out a lot of the work, but we're not like necessarily always their top priority. And there's a concern that when we're on a really tight deadline to be back by January, we need to have somebody who really can manage this process and look out for our interests. So there's a lot of talk about possibly giving the JLMC and the legislature joint rules the authority to hire somebody who can basically be a clerk of the works or a project manager for the reentry on the physical space side. So those are the 2 limited service positions that are being proposed to be created. They may not end up being positions. They may be contracts. It's just we don't know. And I think the goal with the 2.5 million and with the positions is to give flexibility to the JLMC and to the joint rules to do the best they can to make sure we're in great shape for January.
And so is the thinking that what is allocated in C-108 is sufficient to provide that flexibility, or do we need to say something else?
I think at this point it is. What we used the maximum number from the Freeman French study. There is extra general fund in the legislative budget. If that's not one thing we might come up in the next few days is, do we make a little of that money, not CRF, but ARPA, just because this is all about getting ready for January. So we think CRF should work. But I guess that's just with the positions, they may go on for longer. So it may be a small amount, but I think our goal would be to keep it all CRF now, just because we could always substitute money in budget adjustment. And we want to keep away from too many small appropriations in ARPA.
Yeah. And if I may, Senator Kitchell, obviously, if we're spread out more and potentially even in other buildings when committees are working, that strikes me as we are tightly staffed as it is in terms of the ability of Ledge Council to respond and JFO and certainly the legislative operations. Do they need more people? Because it's just going to take more time to do their work.
Well, we did add a position in joint fiscal,
Yeah, I know.
which is still open.
Yeah, and I think you closed it. I think that you added 2 positions in Ledge Council, 1 position in IT, and 1 in joint fiscal, and another in Sergeant Arms for an officer. I think we're pretty well set for now. We have real space issues, and I think it's probably every department that's asked for anything is included in what I think you closed them the other day.
Yes, we did. And honestly, that was in response to kind of our pre-pandemic situation. And I just want to make sure that we're not under-resourcing ourselves and putting too big of a burden on our staff who have already been hugely, the effort they have gone through in the past however many months has been extraordinary.
We can check.
Have another joint legislative management committee on Friday, so
Yeah.
I can raise that. We've talked about, and they supported obviously the 2.5 that we put in, which
Okay.
Steve has discussed why that amount was used. And we thought, and I can ask about the other 2 positions, which I guess the clerk of the works one is still sort of up in the air. And just confirm what we've added relative to our return to normalcy, shall we say.
Yeah.
I think wasn't that a historical period, return to normalcy? I'm sure somebody who's a historian will
Yeah, I
remind.
can think
So
about
we
it.
can just got confirmation from the legislative management, because any positions actually have to go through there as well.
Well, these are limited service, so they actually don't go through them, but it would.
Oh, we don't have to do even limited service?
No, we have to
Join-
create them in the bill, but they don't get created through GLMC because they only do full-time permanent positions.
Okay, we don't have to get their approval.
No,
Okay, all right.
we probably.
I didn't
should
want
notify
to,
them
I
and
didn't
talk
want to
about it.
violate the protocol of.
But I think we definitely, it's worth bringing up with them and let them know.
Yeah, I think as a courtesy,
Yeah,
it should be done.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. But what we know right now, the sense is that C-108 provides sufficient funding both for the physical reconfiguration as well as the staffing. And there's flexibility enough in there so that you can hire the limited service positions if necessary. And we may see that back in the BAA if we need a wee bit more money.
Well, we would have to create the limited
Right.
service.
Right. You'll have to create the positions. Yeah.
Okay. In this budget, or we'll do
Yeah.
that?
Yes,
this budget.
yes,
Okay.
in
Okay.
here.
We'll give you language on that if that's.
Okay.
okay.
But that's
Okay.
why I wanted to, now that we've talked about it, I wanted to make sure that I brought it up Friday as just
Yeah.
as an update relative to the joint management committee. Okay.
Okay. I've got it. Thank you. Thanks for that explanation.
I thought there was a separate joint fiscal position that was still open, but maybe I'm looking.
We did, I think you had closed it. There was also the IT language that was still open, and I think you closed that
We
yesterday.
did that yesterday. I think we got all of the positions attended to, I believe.
Okay,
And we did hear back from AHS that you were correct, Senator Kitchell, that that was a request by Ina Backus to extend the date.
Okay.
There you go. Good.
all right. And thank you. I'm glad my memory was somewhat there. So that's the reason we did it.
Okay.
And I can share her request if you want, but it simply
No.
was because of all the other work. Getting it done was within the time frame, would mean that the report would not be of the quality that they would like it to be. So, so what section again was that?
301, E300.1.
Okay, so you're all right with that now that we have confirmed
Yes, yes,
the reason for it?
yeah.
Okay. All right.
And then you had a thought around your reach up proposal.
Yeah, I wanted to throw this out. First of all, you voted out the child care bill yesterday with an amendment.
Yeah.
That amendment was reviewed, and Stephanie Barrett helped do it because it was referencing funding sources, and wanted to make sure that it was properly written, and that amendment reflects that work. And the chair of Health and Welfare, our plan was to get that amendment so that it was mutually agreeable, didn't need any additional changes, and the Senate could simply concur when the bill came back over. So our plan is to do just that. Now that you voted it out, Senator Lyons will recommend that we concur. But as I was looking several years ago, the last time we did anything to address the level of benefits in Reach Up, it was done. Actually, Senator Westman and I were involved. And at that point, he was on Health and Welfare, and that was to buy back a portion of the SSI counting of income. And these are parents of who are SSI beneficiaries, meaning that they are probably most of them, maybe a few might be over 65, but would generally have a disability, which would preclude their working. And now, if you're able to work, there are enhancements, there are income exclusions, et cetera, that can help supplement the grant. But what I would put out, which we only got the recommendation and it came in very late, is to perhaps go back and pick up where we left off with the SSI treatment, and for the Reach Up families, of which there are about 500 SSI parents receiving, we're counting $77 a month. And so I would like to throw out, and I know that you'll probably have your Human Services Committee, the first thing we do with the money that we had appropriated to Reach Up would be to get rid of that practice of counting a portion of the SSI benefit to that disabled parent. That would cost about 470. It still would leave a considerable amount, relatively speaking, although not relative to the rateable reduction that's out there, then would be available to fund an update of the standard of need to, I don't know whether we had to 2021, but it might mean we can only bring it up to 2019 or 2020. So that's what I would throw out as another option, would be to to eliminate that practice of counting the SSI benefit to that parent with a disability, and do that first, and then the balance of the appropriation would be to simply support an across the board benefit increase to all families.
Okay.
So I don't expect, I'm just throwing it out. I know that you'll have to have further discussion. I know that at the time we did it, it was very controversial about the counting of that SSI benefit in the Reach Up calculation, considering the fact that we're talking about parents with disabilities. So that is something that I would throw out as an alternative for you to consider as we're attempting to address the financial plight. These are really very poor. These children are probably the poorest children we have in the state. So that's what I would ask for you to consider as a way of taking care of that SSI treatment and still provide an increase in a benefit to all families.
Okay. Do you, I was not, thank you for that offer and those thoughts. I was not taking notes about the costs, and it would be good to see that on paper.
Mhm.
And so if perhaps you could ask for, give us a little spreadsheet on how it would work, that would be helpful.
Oh, okay. You mean that note won't do it?
Yeah, well, you can take a picture and send it to me, but yeah.
Okay. All right.
Just so that we're not trusting our notes in
All right. And
conjunction.
I'm sure that this would be a policy that would be well received by disability advocates as well as advocates for children and families. But I'll be more than happy to put the figures into writing. And I don't know, I'll have to, we can follow up and see what it means in terms of the standard of need, what
Yeah.
level, what year brings it up to.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I can do that this morning.
Yeah, so if that's your new proposal, if you can just kind of work it together so that we know what we're responding to, but we'll start looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
So-
sure your human services folks are very familiar.
Yeah.
Senator Westman I'm very much a part of that discussion. I think it was in 2019, perhaps, when we did it.
Yeah, I actually remember that well also.
Yeah, okay. And then, so that, if we've moved 171 and we're going to concur, maybe this afternoon we can look back at the sections if they're related to that, or maybe I don't know whether you want to move on any of the other, moving your 2%, that we moved the 2% to 3% because of how we funded some of what
Yeah.
was in the childcare bill.
Yeah, we are all anxious to bring the big pieces of this budget to a conclusion, but we are also kind of anxious to see how all of the big pieces fit together before we can say yes to these. So we're still, as you know, our policy committees are still considering other proposals from the Senate, and we just need to think about how they're all fitting together. So we're doing our best to work our way through what the Senate has proposed, but there were some significant policy proposals in the budget, and we're still attending to them.
You mean outside the 2 and
Yeah,
2
yeah.
to 3?
Yeah, I'm talking about the whole budget now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And anything else? Committee, I lost, Senator Sears had
He
to
had to
leave
go.
because of his other. So I know that certainly you've been looking at the judiciary, getting that restarted.
Yes.
The other issue that I guess we need to talk about at some point is with the guidance that came out. Obviously, that had very significant impact on how the ARPA use of funding. There are ways that we can look at how much more funding is necessary for the housing initiative, but that would take doing what we did with the CRF, and that is doing some swapping of those federal funds to give us the general fund that is needed for to support that housing agenda, which was a great topic of discussion. Because some of what has happened and made it complicated for us, Representative Hooper, is subsequent to your passing the budget, the governor came out with his proposal of how he would spend all $1 billion. And all of a sudden, those recommendations took on as though they were the agreed upon amount. And so, as you well know, we got a lot of inquiry or from the advocates, why weren't we agreeing to the 90 million of ARPA? And we had obviously responded to saying that you had used the general fund approach, which we supported because we had heard very clearly from VHCB that general fund comes with greater flexibility, obviously around particularly some of the farm housing, but also to leverage other funding sources. So it seemed like your approach was one that we thought was more preferential, and we agreed to use the general fund. So I guess we'll have to have some discussion. I think we have a memo that now would suggest that based on proposals to date, an additional 50 million could possibly be allocated. Did you get that memo from Gus Seelig?
You know, I haven't seen it, but Representative Jessup is our housing person, and I know that she's been in touch with them. I'm assuming that so I have not seen it yet, but I think Rep Jessup has. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll review it and consider it. Our challenge is, we know that we need to build housing very quickly to meet the needs of this vulnerable population. But we also don't want to put ourselves in a position of using funds that can't be spent that way and having to reimburse it. That would just be a tragedy for other important programs in the future if we end up having to reimburse the federal government.
So that's why general fund is maybe the safer way. That's just how we create that capacity. But, and the other thing, which is really, I know that is so important and from a policy perspective, and that's mixed housing. And one of the things, obviously, that has been a concern where you've had the temporary housing and motels has been the need for security, some of the incidents that we really need support, that there's that we really need to develop for the long term, mixed housing and not concentration of low income housing, which years ago was the policy and proved to be really a problem and flawed. So, all right, I just wanted to throw that out there as something that we've got to think about, and that is the extent to which we add to the housing appropriation which is above what either the House or the Senate had.
Yeah, well, and to your point about not ghettoizing certain populations in their housing situations. In addition to that, so yes, we need to have mixed housing, not concentrating one group of housing in a particular area. Senator, we also really need to figure out how to appropriately put services around people so that in fact they are successful as they transition into more stable housing. And we have a work group that's trying to figure it out, but that is just kind of one of the areas that we can build housing and we must build housing, but it will not be successful if we don't also provide appropriate services where needed.
Yeah, Senator Westman, you had your hand up.
So there is the whole sections that we put in that I think are G400 that are those interim pieces talking about building more shelter, and that the work group that you guys initiated in the House came together and we basically took what the work group did. So at some point, some discussion around that I think would be important, but that does get into the source of funds question too. So
yeah. Which we're still trying to understand with the new guidance.
Right, but that interim piece is very important.
Yeah,
Yep.
the 41 million package that we put in, and that language that's in there relative to that work group is we did not alter that at all. That came from and reflective of the collective thinking of that work group, and we tried to be very respectful of the product that and their work to get consensus from that many perspectives was quite an accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, anything else that we should follow up? So I just wanted to bring you up to date on where we were with the childcare, that our plan is simply to concur with the amendment, and that would be the end of that bill.
Okay.
And I will put in writing my comments about if we were to buy back the counting of the the $77 a month, what that would mean. And maybe I can find out what it would mean in terms of what would be the result relative to the standard of need update.
Okay, thank you. That would just be helpful in
Mhm.
our communicating with our colleagues. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And on the higher ed, I know that we've been having some discussion. All of the higher ed right now is just, you said your Commerce Committee is looking at some parts of that as well.
That's correct. Yeah. Peter, I don't know if you, Rep. Fagan, I don't know if you have any more to say other than
No
there's a
further update.
connection.
No further update.
Yeah,
Okay,
They are looking at the workforce development. piece, though.
okay.
yeah.
And that includes like the summer youth program. I mean, that was something that we I must admit, that was something appropriations put in, and actually, we have done that several years in the past
Yeah.
to support Youth Conservation Corps, and had put in additional money to Department of Labor with Sarah Buxton, and that was when some of the members, more barns got painted and so forth. So that was doing something for this group of youth has sort of been a priority for appropriations over a multi-year period of time.
Yeah.
So so that's part of what they're looking at as well.
We understand that's a priority for you, and it's all, in our view, all part of a workforce development package that we're considering.
Okay. And the other thing that we probably need to look at, and you had done it kind of up front, and that was sort of the bucketing of areas of spending. We took it and actually created a separate section of ARPA and created sections of spending. And if we want to look at kind of the future, because we did have still a significant amount of ARPA that we felt needed more time, and with the benefit of guidance and so forth, would be areas of future funding. I think probably, obviously the broadband is one, but housing and some of the other areas. So we might, the other part is to look at, are those the right kind of allocations or categories of future spending? Those were just the ones that we came up with. Maybe they can be more elegantly expressed or not, but I would just throw that out. I think is something that we may want to look at in terms of even sort of the titling of those categories.
So in your creation of the G section, you pulled everything together, and we begin to see how we lay out that funding, and we will agree eventually on those expenditures. But there is a thought that we could look at the $1 billion that is available to us, roughly speaking, and say we broadly think we should be allocating these many dollars to broadband, these many dollars to clean water, these many to climate, these many to taking care of the most vulnerable people or communities and families. And we need to think about what those appropriate buckets are for us to then consider how to make expenditures in the future years. So we're not talking about spending money in those buckets, but just thinking about how they would be allocated,
Well,
and how we ought to be engaging people in that conversation for how they should be allocated in the future, I think.
Yes, I think, you know, one of the comments and is, well, the administration saying that they have got sort of that futuristic construct, and it implies that we don't almost.
Yeah.
And I think we do. I think, you know, the framework or the architecture that we're talking about is a little bit different, because there's no question we wanted to say a resource that we feel needs to be developed, and it ties to the economy, but it's, you know, the how we invest in the people of Vermont. How do we have a better trained workforce? How do we serve this group of youth that right now are kind of not attached to the workforce and need more support and mentoring? And so I think that is, in fact, from a legislative perspective, our visioning of where we need to, where the future of Vermont. And we talk about importing people to the workforce, but, you know, we're saying we've got a lot of native talent here that really is languishing, is really marginalized, and we need to put some attention there as well. So I think it is, in fact, our expression of how we want to invest in that future of Vermont, and that includes the people of Vermont in that particular area. So I think it is an expression of that legislative vision of where these investments should and could be made. And then we're going to have to crosswalk it with ARPA as we currently have it, but then we know maybe there'll be more funding coming down.
Mhm. Yes, yeah. So we need to do some more work, and that strikes me as being in the G section as you created it, that we can think, and I like your notion of the architecture of that. And so we'll figure out how to construct those rooms within the architecture. We were calling them buckets, but maybe they're rooms. Yeah. I don't know. I'm now straining that analogy. Yeah.
Well, I do like keeping it, that one time, because then it keeps the base. And that's something we've got to always keep reminding our colleagues, is that the base and what we have for ongoing revenues, we really have to be very vigilant about and use the one times in the very ways that we are committed.
Yeah.
That they are not ongoing, and we've got to be careful not to be extending our ongoing commitments in a way that aren't sustainable. So, okay, I guess then it's 12 minutes. We're going on the floor. You'll probably have to go on the floor.
Committee.
Committee.
We have another Senate bill that wants to spend money that we have to consider.
What one is that?
Oh, Peter, do you recall, or Kimberly? I'm
S48.
S48. That's right. Yeah. The nursing compact.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So yes, we're in committee in a few minutes too. So
All right. So we need to schedule this afternoon.
Yes.
Do we want to schedule, let's see, we've got a number of bills in approps that we've got to get out. I think we've got 3 at this point. So should we try for 3 o'clock?
Okay, and I think that should work for us. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Teresa, you'll send out a Zoom link and we will reconvene at 3 this afternoon.
Okay. Sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Okay. All right.